To understand the hardships that the Dakota people faced and continue to face today, it is important to understand who the Dakota people are. The Dakota people have a very unique culture, one that revolves around their sacred homeland of Minnesota. Nearly every decision that they make revolves around their respect for the land and all that is in it, nature and animals alike.
These people are called the Dakota, or the Allies. They refer to themselves as Oyate, meaning the people. According to scholars Thomas Peacock and Donald Day, the Dakota people used to be the major tribal nation in the Minnesota area. This is a very sacred land to the Dakota and represents the birthplace and homeland of their tribe and culture. However, non-Native American people acquired the derogatory word Sioux, meaning little snake. There are 7 bands of the Dakota tribe formed an alliance called the Seven Council Fires. These people were called Oceti Sakowin. Of these people, there were 4 Dakota tribes, the Metawankiton, Sisseton, Wapiton, and Wapikute.
They were the original inhabitants of part of the land we call today Minnesota. But to them, this land was called Bedote, meaning where 2 waters come together. Bedote is referring to the place where the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers meet.
With Bedote being the place of where Dakota people originated, it only makes sense that they are the people who were first to live in Minnesota and the area around Minnesota.
Minnesota, a land that was once exclusively Dakota homeland, has been reduced to 4 Native communities in southern Minnesota. Upper Sioux Community, located 5 miles south of Granite Falls on the Minnesota River. Lower Sioux Community, located 2 miles south of Morton along the Minnesota River. Metawankiton Community, located in the Minnesota River Valley near Shakopee. Prairie Island Community, located on the Mississippi River near Red Wing.
Dakota men are responsible for hunting, providing, leading, and protecting. Women are the backbone of the Dakota Nation. They are the educators, the homemakers, and the nurturers. Music is an important tradition in the Dakota culture. Dakota songs are not used to entertain, but instead to connect. The sounds symbolize nature. Their songs bring healing. Dakota songs carry stories and memories. They are the history of the Dakota people.
Kinship was an important part of the Dakota culture. It was used to unify the Dakota people and help foster new relationships with other Native people, as well as non-Native people, especially traders and missionaries. To the Dakota people, kinship meant far more than blood ties. There are many ways in which to become a part of a Dakota family, with the most common way being intermarriage. Because of this, women played a crucial role within Dakota society. Intermarriage was used to create ties with other tribes as well as establish trading relationships among non-natives. For the Dakota people, kinship played a crucial role in acquiring guns, ammunition, and various tools that the settlers possessed. The settlers, in return, used these new kinship ties to foster trading relationships with the Dakota. As well, the Dakota acted as guides, showing the settlers the layout of the land. Overall, kinship allowed the Dakota people to adopt new ways to enhance their standards of living, while still maintaining the overarching themes of their culture. The Dakota people, like many Indian cultures, believed that the earth was precious and offered many gifts. They viewed the animals not only as a source of food and clothing, but as mentors, teaching them how to live a sustainable, natural life. To the Dakota people, society was built around relationships like these with the land, animals, and people, closely echoing the ideals of kinship. To the Dakota, land loss meant more than a loss of money or a means of creating wealth. It was a disruption in the way of life that proves to persist even to this day.
The lifestyle of the Dakota people differed greatly from the lifestyle of colonial people in Minnesota. After years of racism, corrupt treaty enforcement, and hunger, the Dakota people in Minnesota had grown desperate for a change in the treatment they were experiencing. In addition to the growing frustration of the Dakota people, the racist view of the Native people and many stories of savagery of Native tribes began to cloud the minds of the colonial people. Growing misunderstandings of each other would lead to the Dakota conflict of 1862. The Dakota began to starve because the settlers were taking over their land, occupying areas that were used for gaming, and withholding food that was promised to them. On August 15, 1862, Chief Little Crow, along with others, went to the post to get the food and the money they had been promised, but they were denied.
Chief Little Crow's response was this: "We have waited a long time. The money is ours, but we cannot get it. We have no food, but here are these stores filled with food. We ask that you, the agent, make some arrangement by which we can get food from the stores, or else we may take our own way to keep ourselves from starving. When men are hungry, they help themselves." Chief Little Crow was opposed to going to war against the white man, but in the end, he reluctantly accepted the tribe's decision to go to war. Indian agent Andrew Merrick said in response to the Dakota people and the Lower Sioux Agency who desired to buy food on credit, "So far as I am concerned, if they are hungry, let them eat grass or their own dung."
On August 17, 1862, a Dakota man and a small hunting party killed several settlers after being beaten with a broom, in an incident that would finally ignite the growing tensions between the Dakota and the European settlers, causing the state of Minnesota to erupt into war. This incident led to a council meeting where the Indians decided it was time to go to war. Little Crow led this council meeting. He agreed to lead the tribes through the conflict, even though he knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. The war began with a Dakota attack on the Lower Sioux Agency on August 18, 1862. Andrew Merrick was killed in the attack and had grass stuffed in his mouth. The war took place throughout the Minnesota River Valley, with the biggest battle taking place in Newell, where much of the town burned down and there were few survivors. The war did not last long. It started in August 1862 and ended with most Dakota surrendering by mid-September. The post-war exile of the Dakota people from the state of Minnesota was one of the darkest moments in Minnesota's past. Upon the surrender of the Dakota, many Native people were held in an internment camp in Fort Snelling. Many died in the camp, and hundreds were sentenced to death. President Lincoln pardoned hundreds, but on December 26, 1862, 38 Dakota men were executed in Mankato in the largest single-day execution in American history. Most of the Dakota people were forced to leave Minnesota after the loss of the war, and many politicians supported the forceful removal of the tribe.
Governor Alexander Ramsey stated, "The Sioux Indians of Minnesota must be exterminated or driven forever beyond the borders of the state."
Some battles between the Dakota and the colonial settlers continued through 1864. However, the Dakota were essentially forced from Minnesota. Another result of the war were bounties being placed on the Indians' heads. Many Indians were killed because of these bounties, one of those being Chief Little Crow. One day when he was out picking berries, he was spotted and killed. It wasn't until later that the settlers realized it was Chief Little Crow that they had killed. The United States of America failed the Dakota population because the U.S. government failed to uphold the treaties. The Dakota were forced between a rock and a hard place, and when they followed U.S. example and abandoned the treaties, U.S. forces attacked them and forced them from their homelands. The Dakota people were placed in a no-win situation, and the U.S. government acted in a savage manner that must be made right. We must hold true to the agreed-upon treaties and uphold our promises to the Dakota people. The Dakota people were truly decimated culturally and physically in the Dakota War of 1862 and its aftermath.
When deciding whether or not the Minnesota government should apologize to Native American groups, it will be helpful to understand a bit about each of the nations that are affected by these historical devastating policies. We'll start by introducing the Ojibwe people, or Anishinaabe. Here again are the 7 Ojibwe reservations in Minnesota. These tribes, excluding Red Lake, formed a central government known as the Minnesota Chippewa tribe in the 1930s. Of course, Ojibwe people didn't always live on these reservations. Their stories describe how they were guided along the chain of Great Lakes from the east coast by a Miigwech shell. They headed west, settling in the Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota region, where they found food growing on water. You may have heard of this sacred food. It's called hominem, or wild rice in English. Gitchigami, or Lake Superior, was a popular stopping place and is still important to many modern Ojibwes. Ojibwe people have always referred to themselves as Anishinaabe, or original man, in their own language. Chippewa and Ojibwe were both names created and used by the settler society. However, the collective name Anishinaabe was not used in the way that American is used today. Rather, it helped identify people who spoke the same language. The concept of an Ojibwe nation didn't arise until reservations were being formed, and it was necessary for the people to organize on a larger scale in order to preserve their ways of life. The Ojibwe lived according to seasonal rounds. Before reservation or urban lifestyles were adopted, the Ojibwe were primarily fishers, trappers, hunters, and foragers. Contrary to popular belief, traditional Ojibwe diets did not feature fry bread. Fish, berries, maple sugar, and wild rice are just a few examples of traditional staple foods. Many of these practices are still found among Anishinaabe today. An important material in all aspects of traditional Ojibwe life is birch bark. Birch bark was integral to daily life because it was used for cooking, housing, making canoes, and ceremony. Another important part of Ojibwe society is the clan system. Clans form the core political and economic units of Ojibwe society. The Ojibwe were separated into different due-de-mug, or clans, that moved together. Each of these represented different roles its people would play in society, such as security, healing, and speaking for the group at larger gatherings. Elders are an important part of Ojibwe culture. They present spirit names, teach skills, tell stories, and pass on traditions. Respecting your elders is a key value in Ojibwe society. These are just a few examples of the traditions and practices of the Great Lakes area Ojibwe. Despite the challenges of assimilation, there are growing numbers of people out there fighting to reclaim traditional ways of life. There are Anishinaabe rappers, authors, and leaders of language, culture, and immersion camps. We feel that these fighters deserve our support and an apology from the government who drove the customs and language to the brink of extinction.